Picture a dark, mysterious forest in the dead of winter, thick fog rolling between ancient, frozen trees. Actually, think of the feeling of staring out at a dark, mysterious lake at night, watching a giant shadow moving just below the surface. That same sense of subtle, building tension, that's exactly what we're dissecting today. We're diving deep into the lore and exploring the literal anatomy of the Wendigo curse.
They say the Wendigo is not born, it's created. Just let that sink in for a second. This isn't your standard monster story. It is a terrifying, psychological evolution. And as we explore these accounts today, you'll see that once that deep, gnawing hunger begins, it literally never stops. So, let's look at where this nightmare actually starts. It begins here, with the physical evidence. Our sources detail a chilling discovery by a rescue team pushing deep into the winter woods. They found an abandoned campsite. The fire was somehow still burning, throwing these long, cinematic shadows against the snow. But the man staying there, completely gone. And right beside his tent were these massive footprints. But they defied all logic. Way too long to be human, and impossibly way too thin to be an animal. Section 1. Trapped in the cold.
So how exactly does an experienced hiker end up just vanishing and leaving behind anomalous footprints? Well, we have to rewind a few days. He went into the forest totally alone, packed with supplies for a standard one-week trip. But a massive storm rolled in and trapped him. Day 1, he's completely calm, doing everything right, rationing his food, but by day 4, the whole situation shifts dramatically. His food vanishes faster than it should. He completely stops sleeping. Extreme paranoia sets in, and the whispers begin. Because it wasn't just isolation playing tricks on his mind. Every single night, something was watching his camp from out there in the darkness. Just a glowing eye barely visible between the frozen trees. Imagine that agonizing suspense, knowing a giant shadow is moving just beyond the fog, but it never comes close enough for you to see clearly. You just catch the subtle movement. By the 4th night of zero sleep and an empty stomach, the auditory horror really kicks in. Distant echoes in the wind turned into whispers right outside his tent. Soft, human, literally calling his name. And the terrifying thing is, it sounded familiar, almost comforting. But deep down, he knew for a fact he was utterly alone out there. And then, the whisper came from inside the tent, right behind his shoulder. But when he clicked on his flashlight, absolutely nothing there. Listen, this wasn't just in his head. When the sun came up, he found physical proof. Long, jagged claw marks cut incredibly deep into the frozen trees circling his camp, as if something massive had been pacing around him all night long in the pitch black. To make matters worse, the storm intensified and his radio died entirely. The harsh reality set in. Nobody was coming. And those voices drifting out of the woods? They just kept repeating one single, chilling word. Eat. 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 Try to imagine the sheer psychological toll of that. Relentless whispers echoing through the freezing wind, while starvation is literally tearing at your own stomach. This specific psychological progression is really the core of our explainer today, because the hunger fundamentally changed him. Extreme isolation breeds this intense, burning anger. That anger eventually fractures your mind into pure paranoia. And paranoia, well, that throws the door wide open to the voices. Always waiting, always whispering from somewhere inside those dark woods. By the 6th night, the forest went dead silent. No wind howling, no animals. Total silence. And that's when he finally saw it, standing way off between the trees. Tall, impossibly thin, just watching him without moving a muscle. It didn't attack, it just stood there with this terrifying, motionless patience, like it was just waiting for something to happen. The camper absolutely panicked. At first light, he made a desperate run for it, but every direction looked exactly the same, just an endless maze of fog, snow, and darkness. After hours of exhausting, futile walking, he stumbled into a clearing and realized he was right back at his exact same campsite, the same burning fire, the same bizarre footprints, and this overwhelming, sinking realization that the whispers weren't just out in the woods anymore. They had moved inside his own head, echoing his own thoughts. You know what must be done. And the voice was completely calm, patient, almost human. His hands were shaking, his breathing heavy, and that calm realization signals the final breaking point of his mind. The hunger had won.
Section 2. Anatomy of the Curse. Okay, let's pull back from that specific nightmare for a second and objectively analyze the local legends behind all this. What is the Wendigo? The lore defines it as a cursed entity born of isolation and hunger that transforms its victim into a starving monster. It's essentially an explainer of extreme environmental psychology, mutating into visceral physical horror. The curse demands strict conditions, extreme isolation, followed by starvation, leading to an unnatural obsession, and finally, the horrific physical transformation.
Look at the traits consistently reported by survivors and hunters over the decades. First off, it actually grows taller every single time it feeds. It is perpetually starving, literally incapable of being full. Its body becomes impossibly thin, no matter how much it consumes. And perhaps the most sinister detail, it mimics familiar voices. Survivors talk about encounters with former humans whose voices were just wrong. One guy claimed the creature used his dead brother's voice, while another said it screamed like a crying child to lure prey into the fog. But every single witness agrees on one thing: the hunger always comes first.
Section 3. The Aftermath.
So, what is actually left behind when the curse takes hold? Let's jump back to our rescue team at that abandoned campsite. They found blood splattered around the campfire, shredded clothing frozen solid beneath the snow. And leading away from the camp, deeper into the abyss, were fresh footprints, but they were not human anymore. They never found a body, just the horrific, empty aftermath of a completed transformation. But here is where it gets truly wild. The story doesn't end there. A few weeks later, a completely different group of hikers in that exact same forest reported hearing someone. A weak, human voice begging for help, asking them to come closer. You see, the terrifying trap just resets itself. It weaponizes our own humanity, our empathy, to pull us into the deep woods.
Tragically, one of those hikers made a terrible mistake and followed that voice into the misty trees. He vanished without a trace. He was missing for exactly 3 days before searchers finally managed to track him down.
And when they found him, he was physically alive, sure, but his eyes were entirely empty. He completely refused to speak normally. The rescue reports state he just sat there, traumatized beyond repair, continuously whispering this single haunting phrase over and over. It's still hungry.
Section 4. The Final Warning. So why does all of this matter, and what's the big takeaway for you today? Now, some people will tell you this is strictly folklore, just an old warning story cooked up to keep people from wandering off. But the chilling reality? People still vanish in those northern forests every single winter. And every so often, search parties still stumble across massive, unnatural footprints circling abandoned campsites in the snow before disappearing completely into the darkness. The absolutely crucial thing to understand about this lore is its patient method. The Wendigo never hunts you immediately. First, it just waits in the freezing shadows. It lets the isolation break you down. It patiently waits for the hunger to begin. So imagine yourself out there for a second, surrounded by dense winter fog, water drops freezing as they fall, and a low-frequency rumble in the howling wind. If you hear whispers deep in the woods during a snowstorm, a voice that sounds exactly like someone you love, begging for your help, will you follow the voice? Thanks for joining me for this explainer. Stay safe out there.